Imagine dedicating your life to helping someone, and years later, after they've reached the stars, they remember the sacrifices you made. This is the incredible story of Caitlin Clark and the woman who helped raise her childhood maid, who, even at 80, is still cleaning homes to survive. In a world where fame and success often make people forget their roots, Caitlin Clark proves that gratitude runs deeper than success. When Caitlin learned that the woman who cared for her as a child was still struggling in her 80s, she knew she couldn't let it go unnoticed. The gesture that followed? It'll melt your heart. Stay tuned to see how Caitlin Clark, the rising basketball star, shows the world what it means to give back and honor those who've shaped our lives. This isn't just a story of fame and fortune. It's about love, sacrifice, and remembering where you came from. Don't miss out. Hit subscribe and watch the full story unfold. This one will stick with you forever. It's a cold morning, and the sun barely peeks through the frosted windows. The house is quiet except for the faint sound of footsteps shuffling along the old wooden floors. At 80, Maria still wakes up early, her hands slightly shaky but steady with years of practice. She's been cleaning houses for decades, a career she started when she was young, desperate to provide for her family. But one thing Maria never expected was to be still doing this work when she should have been enjoying her golden years. Maria was much more than just a housekeeper to the Clark family. She was part of their world, a constant presence in their home when they were struggling. Back when Caitlin Clark was just a little girl with big dreams and even bigger potential, Maria was the one who made sure their home was taken care of. She wasn't just cleaning, she was nurturing, providing a sense of stability for Caitlin and her siblings when life was chaotic. For Caitlin, Maria was like a second mother, always there with a smile, a kind word, and a warm hug. Her hands weren't just cleaning, they were offering comfort in times of uncertainty, helping to keep the world together when everything around it seemed fragile. There were days when Caitlin would run home from school, excited about the next basketball game or the school project she was working on. And Maria would be there, folding towels or scrubbing the kitchen, offering encouragement when Caitlin needed it most. She wasn't a coach or a parent, but in her own quiet way, she was a guide, someone Caitlin would look to for calm and reassurance when the world felt too fast, too much to handle. Maria had always been the glue that held the Clark household together, quietly behind the scenes. And Caitlin? She noticed. Every single time. As Caitlin grew, so did her ambitions. With every dribble, every shot, every game, she moved closer to the dream she had long held in her heart. The dream of playing at the highest level, of becoming something more than what anyone could have imagined. The Clark family's situation slowly began to change. Success followed, and with it came new challenges. But no matter how much their lives shifted, Maria remained there, quietly working away, offering her help without expecting anything in return. As years passed, Caitlin's basketball career soared to heights no one could have predicted. She became a household name, not just in Iowa, but across the nation. Her talent, work ethic, and fierce dedication turned her into a force on the court, and she was soon receiving accolades and recognition from all over. But despite the fame, despite the awards and the contracts, Caitlin never forgot where she came from, and she never forgot Maria. But as Caitlin moved forward into her new life, one filled with games, interviews, and endless opportunities, Maria remained in the same place, still cleaning houses. She was no longer the young woman who had taken care of Caitlin and her family. She was now 80, her body beginning to feel the weight of all the years spent scrubbing, dusting, and working tirelessly for others. There were no retirement plans, no dreams of slowing down. Maria, who had given so much of herself to others, was still working long hours, hoping to scrape by. She never asked for anything in return. It wasn't in her nature to complain. But something inside Caitlin stirred when she heard of Maria's continued struggle. A wave of guilt, mixed with love and gratitude, washed over her. Here was the woman who had poured her heart into the Clark family for so many years, someone who had helped her when she was too young to understand the sacrifices Maria had made. Caitlin owed so much to Maria, and now, as an adult and a successful athlete, she had the means to do something to repay that kindness. It wasn't just a matter of paying back a debt. It was a matter of honoring the people who helped her when she was small, when her future was uncertain and her world was far less predictable. Maria had never expected anything in return. But Caitlin knew that if anyone deserved recognition, if anyone deserved to be taken care of, it was Maria. This wasn't just about giving money. It was about giving back the love, the care, and the support that Maria had shown her for years. And so, with a heart full of gratitude and a desire to do what was right, Caitlin made a decision that would change everything. She knew she couldn't change the past, but she could make sure that Maria wouldn't spend her last years still working tirelessly, struggling to make ends meet. She owed Maria so much more than just a thank you. Caitlin's life had been shaped by Maria's kindness, her hard work, and her quiet strength, and it was time to show her how much that meant. Caitlin, with all her fame, fortune, and recognition, was about to do something far greater than any championship win. She was about to show the world what it means to never forget where you came from, and what it means to honor the people who helped you when no one was looking. Growing up, Caitlin Clark's world was filled with the noise of basketballs bouncing, sneakers squeaking across the hardwood, and the thrill of every game she played. But amidst all that, there was one quiet, consistent presence that anchored her, a woman who wasn't related to her by blood but played a pivotal role in shaping the person she would become. Maria, the family's maid, was there long before Caitlin was known for her incredible shooting skills, long before anyone could even imagine that a small-town girl would go on to dominate the college basketball scene. When Caitlin was little, life wasn't easy. The Clark family didn't have the luxuries or comforts that many people take for granted. But Maria, with her gentle nature and unwavering work ethic, was a constant in their home, offering not only help with the chores but an unspoken comfort that Caitlin's parents needed. She was always there, day in and day out, without asking for anything in return. Maria's care was unconditional, and it wasn't just about keeping the house clean. She became an emotional support for Caitlin's parents, who were doing their best to raise a family while juggling work and life's challenges. Her dedication was a lifeline, one that Caitlin and her siblings grew to appreciate as they got older. From an early age, Caitlin saw how much effort Maria put into everything she did. Whether it was cleaning the kitchen after a busy dinner or taking care of the laundry, Maria worked tirelessly, never complaining, never seeking recognition. She was simply there, doing what needed to be done, quietly contributing in ways that Caitlin couldn't fully understand at the time. But as she grew older, Caitlin began to see how much Maria was shaping not just their home, but their lives as well. Maria wasn't just the person who cleaned their house, she was the woman who ensured the house felt like a home. She gave Caitlin a sense of stability, of normalcy, even when Caitlin's world felt like it was constantly shifting, with every new game and every new challenge. Caitlin remembers the times when she would come home from a tough practice or after a disappointing loss. She'd walk into the kitchen, and there would be Maria preparing a meal or tidying up after a long day's work. She remembers the way Maria would offer her quiet words of encouragement, the little things that made her feel like everything would be okay. Maria didn't just take care of the house, she took care of Caitlin's heart. She offered a calm presence that helped Caitlin find peace in moments of uncertainty. Though Caitlin's basketball skills were clear from a young age, she knew that her future wasn't guaranteed. Nothing in life is. And even as she became more determined to succeed on the court, she still relied on Maria's quiet support, knowing that no matter what happened, Maria would always be there, just like she had always been. As Caitlin grew, so did her ambitions. She knew she had a gift, but that gift didn't come without its challenges. There were days when she doubted herself, when the weight of her dreams seemed too heavy to carry. It was during those moments that Maria's influence was most felt. Maria never once told Caitlin to stop dreaming. She never once said that basketball wasn't a realistic path. Instead, Maria's quiet faith in Caitlin's abilities served as a foundation, helping her believe that anything was possible. But beyond the basketball, beyond the trophies and accolades that Caitlin would eventually earn, what stayed with her was the knowledge that Maria had been there every step of the way, supporting, encouraging, and offering kindness when it was needed most. Even when Caitlin was at her lowest, Maria never judged or doubted her. She just quietly believed that Caitlin could rise, just like she always had. And as Caitlin's basketball career began to take off, Maria continued with her own life, not seeking fame, not seeking recognition. She simply carried on, providing for herself and doing the work she had always known. She had no expectation of anything in return. It wasn't about rewards or thanks for Maria. It was about giving her best in whatever role she had, regardless of whether anyone noticed. And yet, Caitlin noticed. She noticed every moment of Maria's sacrifice, every bit of hard work that went into making sure Caitlin's family had one less thing to worry about. When Caitlin left for college, she took with her the lessons Maria had taught her, the value of hard work, the importance of family, and the quiet strength that comes from giving without expecting anything in return. As Caitlin's life became busier with her rise in basketball, Maria's life remained the same, quiet, steady, and filled with a tireless dedication to her work. Caitlin had become a star, earning scholarships and breaking records, but for Maria, the years continued to pass in the same rhythm. The same dedication to hard work, the same silent care, the same humility. Yet, in the back of Caitlin's mind, something never quite sat right. She had made it. She had reached the heights she had dreamed of. But what about Maria? The woman who had been there for her when no one else was? The one who had believed in her when she was just a child with a hoop dream? Caitlin had achieved her success, but Maria? Maria had never asked for anything in return. Still, Caitlin knew that she owed her so much more than just a thank you. As Caitlin's fame grew, the stories of her incredible games, her clutch performances, and her rise to stardom were everywhere. But the one story that was most important to her was the one she hadn't yet told. The story of Maria, the woman who had been there all along. Caitlin's heart ached when she thought about how Maria was still working at 80, still cleaning houses, still going unnoticed by the world. The reality of it hit Caitlin harder than she expected. This was the woman who had helped raise her, and now she was struggling to retire with dignity. For all the glory Caitlin had received, Maria had never asked for anything. But Caitlin knew it was time to change that. It was time for her to show Maria how much she meant, how much her love and support had shaped the woman Caitlin had become. It was time to give back in a way that would truly honor Maria's selflessness and sacrifice. In that moment, Caitlin realized that no matter how far she went, no matter how many games she won or how many accolades she earned, there was something she had to do to make sure the person who had been there for her from the very beginning knew that she mattered, too. This wasn't just about thanking Maria. It was about showing her that her kindness had never been forgotten. And Caitlin would make sure Maria knew it. But it wasn't just the material things that made a difference. It was the emotional support that Caitlin had longed to give back. As the days passed, Maria started to open up more to Caitlin, sharing stories of her life, the trials and triumphs she had faced, and the deep love she had for Caitlin's family. Maria spoke of how, when Caitlin was just a young girl, she had always believed that Caitlin was destined for greatness. She had watched Caitlin grow with pride, always knowing that the girl she had cared for would one day change the world. Those words, spoken with such raw emotion, touched Caitlin in a way that words couldn't describe. It was in that moment that Caitlin understood. Maria had always believed in her, had always known that Caitlin would be something special. And now, Caitlin was showing Maria that she, too, was special. For Maria, there was a sense of peace in knowing that she could finally rest. She no longer had to worry about the future, no longer had to hustle day in and day out just to make ends meet. She could finally look back at her life with pride, knowing that her sacrifices had mattered, knowing that Caitlin would always carry a part of her with her. It wasn't just about financial security. It was about the emotional connection they shared, the bond that had been formed through years of love, respect, and shared experiences. Maria could now look forward to the rest of her life knowing that Caitlin had her back, that Caitlin would be there for her just as Maria had been there for Caitlin all those years ago. The rest of Maria's days were filled with a quiet contentment. She spent time with her family, visited Caitlin whenever she could, and found joy in the simple things that had once been pushed aside in the busyness of life. Caitlin, on the other hand, felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that she had done what she could to give back to the woman who had given her everything. And though the world saw Caitlin as a basketball star, a name in headlines, a role model for young girls everywhere, Caitlin knew that her real success lay not in her basketball achievements, but in the love she had shown Maria, the woman who had shaped her life in ways that no game or trophy could ever do. In the end, it was clear that Caitlin's greatest victory wasn't on the court. It was in the way she had loved, cared for, and supported the woman who had been her greatest supporter, her quiet champion. And for Maria, it was the realization that, after all the years of hard work and sacrifice, she could finally rest in the knowledge that she had been seen, loved, and cared for in the most meaningful way imaginable. Together, Caitlin and Maria had created a legacy of love and gratitude, one that transcended the boundaries of what most people would call a success story. For both of them, it was about something far more lasting, a bond of love, and the quiet peace that comes from knowing that, in the end, we all deserve to rest. Maria sat on the porch of her new home, a warm cup of tea cradled in her hands as the golden hues of the evening sun painted the sky in soft shades of orange and pink. She had never imagined a life like this, a life where she didn't have to wake up before dawn to prepare for a long day of work, where she didn't have to worry about bills piling up, where she could simply exist in peace. She looked around at the beautiful garden, the comfortable chair she was sitting in, the quiet that surrounded her, and she felt something she hadn't truly felt in years: contentment. Caitlin had done something Maria never thought possible. She had given her freedom. The kind of freedom that money alone couldn't buy. The kind of freedom that came from knowing she was loved, that she was valued, that her years of sacrifice had not been in vain. And yet, Maria couldn't help but feel a quiet disbelief in her heart. Could she really accept this? Could she really allow herself to enjoy this life Caitlin had gifted her? For so many years, Maria had dedicated her life to taking care of others, always putting herself second. To now be on the receiving end of such love and generosity felt almost unnatural. Caitlin saw the hesitation in Maria's eyes every time she tried to relax, every time she sat down instead of finding something to clean, every time she hesitated before accepting even the simplest of gestures: a new dress, a nice dinner, a day out. Maria wasn't used to being taken care of, and Caitlin knew it would take time. She had spent her whole life serving others, but now it was time for Maria to learn what it meant to be cherished. One evening, Caitlin sat beside Maria, watching the sunset with her. She could sense the thoughts running through Maria's mind, the silent battle she was having with herself. "You know," Caitlin said softly, breaking the silence, "I used to think success was about trophies and records. About being the best on the court, winning games, proving myself over and over again. But I was wrong." Maria turned to her, listening. "Success," Caitlin continued, "is about the people who shaped us. The people who stood beside us when no one else did. And Maria, you were that person for me. You were my biggest supporter when I was just a little girl dreaming of something bigger. You were there when I didn't even know what I needed. You were there when I had nothing to offer but a little girl's laughter and a love for the game. And now, it's my turn. My turn to be there for you." Maria wiped a tear from her cheek, her heart swelling with emotion. "You don't owe me anything, Caitlin," she whispered. Caitlin shook her head, smiling. "That's where you're wrong. I do owe you. Not just for the things you did, but for the love you gave me. That kind of love, you can't put a price on it. And I don't want you to feel like you have to deserve this, Maria. You already do. Every bit of it. This is your time to rest. To enjoy life. To let yourself be happy." Maria let out a shaky breath, nodding. It was going to take time, but in that moment, she realized something she had never allowed herself to believe before: she was worthy of this kindness. She was worthy of rest. The days that followed were different. Maria slowly began to embrace her new life, allowing herself to experience the little joys she had never had time for before. She went on walks without worrying about getting to work on time. She sat in the sun without feeling guilty about not doing something productive. She read books, laughed more, and allowed herself to be taken care of. One afternoon, Caitlin surprised Maria with something special. She led her into a cozy room in the house, one that had been transformed into something beautiful. The walls were lined with shelves filled with books, soft armchairs sat by the windows, and there was a desk with an old-fashioned typewriter sitting on top. Maria looked around, her eyes wide with wonder. "What is this?" she asked. Caitlin grinned. "Your writing room," she said simply. Maria's breath hitched. "My, what?" "I know you used to love writing when you were younger," Caitlin said gently. "Before life got too busy. Before you had to put everyone else first. I wanted to give you a place where you could write again. Tell your stories. Share everything you've kept inside all these years." Tears welled up in Maria's eyes as she stepped forward, running her fingers over the typewriter. Memories of her childhood dreams, dreams she had buried long ago, rushed back to her. She had always loved writing, had once dreamed of telling stories that would touch people's hearts. But life had taken her down a different path, one of hard work and responsibility. She turned to Caitlin, overwhelmed. "You remembered," she whispered. Caitlin smiled. "Of course, I did. You've given so much of yourself to others, Maria. Now, it's time for you to give something to yourself." Maria sat down in the chair, her fingers hovering over the keys. For the first time in decades, she felt a spark of something she had almost forgotten: possibility. The possibility of a life that wasn't just about working and surviving, but about living. And as she pressed the first key, the sound of the typewriter echoed softly in the quiet room. It was the sound of a new beginning, a sound of a life finally reclaimed. Caitlin stood back, watching Maria with a heart full of love and pride. This, she realized, was the greatest victory of all, not a game won, not a record broken, but the knowledge that she had given back to the woman who had given her so much. Maria was no longer just someone who had taken care of others. She was someone who deserved to be taken care of. As the sun set outside, Maria continued to type, lost in a world she had long forgotten. A world where she mattered, where her voice had meaning, where she could finally tell the story she had carried in her heart for so long. And for the first time in a very, very long time, Maria felt truly, deeply at peace. As the years passed, Maria's life transformed in ways she had never dared to dream. She no longer woke up to the aching burden of responsibility weighing down on her shoulders. Instead, she rose each morning with a newfound sense of peace, a life that no longer revolved around endless toil, but around the simple joys she had once been too busy to notice. Caitlin had given her something far greater than financial security or a beautiful home. She had given Maria the gift of time. Time to rest, time to breathe, time to rediscover herself. Maria's writing room became her sanctuary. Every morning, she would sit by the large window, her fingers dancing over the typewriter keys, pouring out stories that had lived inside her heart for decades. They were stories of resilience, of love, of sacrifice, stories inspired by her own life, by the countless years she had spent taking care of others. It felt strange at first, allowing herself to indulge in something that was purely for her. But with every word she wrote, Maria felt a piece of herself come alive again. Caitlin visited often, bringing books, flowers, and stories from the road. She had never been too busy for Maria, never let fame or success pull her away from the woman who had once been her rock. No matter how many arenas she played in, no matter how many records she shattered, she always made time for Maria. One day, as they sat together in Maria's garden, Caitlin pulled out a small, wrapped box and placed it in Maria's lap. Maria looked up, startled. "What is this?" Caitlin grinned. "Just open it." With careful fingers, Maria unwrapped the gift and gasped softly as she saw what lay inside. A book. But not just any book. Her book. The book she had spent the last year writing. The book she had thought would never see the light of day. The title was embossed in gold, her name shining proudly on the cover. Maria's hands trembled as she traced the letters. "Caitlin, how?" Caitlin's eyes shimmered with emotion. "I told you your words deserve to be heard. So, I sent your manuscript to a publisher. They loved it, Maria. They wanted the world to read your story." Tears spilled down Maria's cheeks as she clutched the book to her chest. She had spent a lifetime in the background, always serving, always giving, never thinking her voice mattered. And yet, here it was, her story, her legacy, something that would live on long after she was gone. "It's your turn to inspire people," Caitlin said softly. "Your words will touch lives, just like your kindness has touched mine." Maria could hardly believe it. The little girl she had once tucked into bed, the young athlete she had cheered for from the sidelines, the woman who had now changed her life. Caitlin had not only given her comfort and security, but she had given Maria back herself. The book became a quiet sensation. Readers from all over connected with Maria's story, drawn to her resilience, her selflessness, her unwavering strength. Letters began pouring in, messages from people who had been moved by her journey, who had seen their own struggles reflected in her words. Maria had never imagined that her life, one she had once thought to be small and ordinary, could impact so many. But perhaps the most beautiful part of it all was seeing how much Caitlin had grown because of her. She watched Caitlin not just as an athlete, but as a person, someone who carried Maria's lessons with her into the world. Caitlin never forgot where she came from. She used her platform to help others, to give back in ways that would have made Maria proud even if she had done nothing else. And when people asked Caitlin about her greatest inspiration, she never hesitated. She didn't name a famous player or a coach or even her own family. She always said the same name, Maria. Years went by, and Maria grew older, but never weaker in spirit. She spent her days surrounded by love, by warmth, by the family she had built not by blood, but by the bonds of the heart. And Caitlin? She continued to shine, not just on the court, but in life, carrying forward the legacy of love that Maria had given her. One evening, as Maria sat by the window, watching the sun set over the garden, she felt something deep within her: peace. She had spent her life giving to others, never expecting anything in return. And yet, she had received the most beautiful gift of all. She had been seen, she had been loved, and she had left behind something that would never fade, a legacy, not of wealth or fame, but of kindness, of selflessness, of the quiet power of a heart that never stopped giving. As the last light of the day faded into twilight, Maria closed her eyes, a soft smile on her lips. She had done enough. She had given enough. And now, she could finally rest, knowing that her story, her love, would live on forever. Maria's journey was never about wealth or fame. It was about love, sacrifice, and the quiet strength of a life well lived. In the end, she found what she had never asked for but had always deserved: recognition, peace, and the unwavering love of the girl she had once cared for. And as Caitlin continued to carry Maria's lessons with her, inspiring others both on and off the court, Maria's legacy lived on, not in trophies or records, but in the hearts she had touched. Thank you for watching this incredible story of love and gratitude. If this touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring stories. See you in the next one. As the years passed, life carried on its relentless pace, and Caitlin Clark's world transformed in ways she never could have predicted. Her basketball career took off in ways no one could have imagined, and her name became synonymous with success, grit, and determination. The once small-town girl was now a star, celebrated on the courts and in the media, her name a household one across the country. With each victory, with each championship game, Caitlin's future seemed brighter, her path more secure. But for Maria, life had continued in a different rhythm. Maria had worked hard for as long as Caitlin could remember. There were no flashy contracts, no sponsorship deals, no accolades or recognition. There was just the next house to clean, the next task to complete. Maria had dedicated herself to the work she did, believing that this was her purpose, even as her body grew older, and the years started to take their toll. The hands that once moved with the grace of a young woman now trembled slightly as she dusted off shelves and scrubbed floors. The back that had once carried bags of groceries and heavy laundry now ached after a few hours of work. But Maria never complained. She had long learned that work was the way of life, that sacrifice was just part of the journey. She never once thought about slowing down or taking a break. There was always something else to do, someone else to help. Maria had never been one to ask for anything. In fact, she had always believed that giving was the essence of life. But deep down, there were days when the years of hard labor weighed heavily on her. The aches in her joints were a constant reminder of how much time had passed. Her energy had begun to fade, and she knew that she was no longer the young woman she once was. But even in those moments of exhaustion, Maria carried on, because that was what she knew. The thought of retiring, of stepping away from the work that had defined so much of her life, never seemed like an option. There were bills to pay, food to buy, and life to manage. And no one at all, had ever offered to help her with that. Not that she expected it. She was used to standing on her own. But somewhere in the back of her mind, she knew this couldn't go on forever. She had worked so hard for so many years, for others, for her family, for Caitlin's family, and now the body that had once been so strong was starting to falter. She still had her pride, and her independence meant everything to her. Asking for help was never easy, and so Maria continued to push through the pain, continuing with the same quiet determination that had been her signature for so long. Then one day, as Maria finished cleaning the kitchen of the latest house she was hired to work in, a thought crept into her mind. A fleeting thought that lingered longer than she wanted it to. She wondered, perhaps for the first time, what life would be like if she didn't have to work anymore. What would it be like to rest? To be able to look after herself without having to think about the next job, the next chore? Would there be someone to help her? Someone to care for her like she had cared for others for so long? But even as she thought about it, Maria pushed the thought away. It felt like a dream, something unattainable. She wasn't one for daydreams. She was a woman of action, of practicality. There was no use wishing for things that weren't meant to be. Instead, she set her sights on the next task, the next thing that needed doing, and focused all of her energy on that. It was a life of service and sacrifice, but it had been hers for so long. But Caitlin hadn't forgotten. The more Caitlin's career flourished, the more she realized that Maria, the woman who had helped raise her, was still out there, still working, still struggling. Caitlin, now a household name, had built a life for herself, but she could never shake the feeling that something was missing. And as her success grew, so did the weight of her debt to the woman who had been there for her every step of the way. The woman who, even when she was exhausted, never stopped caring for Caitlin, never stopped supporting her. It was at that moment, when Caitlin was reflecting on how far she had come, that the realization hit her like a ton of bricks. Maria deserved more. She deserved more than just a thank you, more than just words of appreciation. She deserved to have her life eased, to have her hard work recognized in a way that mattered. It wasn't enough for Caitlin to simply acknowledge the role Maria had played in her life. She needed to do something to make sure that Maria could finally stop working, that she could enjoy her later years with dignity and peace. But how could Caitlin do that? How could she repay a lifetime of service and sacrifice? The answer was simple, yet deeply emotional. Caitlin needed to give Maria the one thing she had never asked for but deserved the most, a chance to rest, to retire from the endless grind, to finally experience the joy of knowing that her work had been enough and that now someone would take care of her. It wasn't about money. It wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about doing what felt right, about honoring the person who had given so much of herself without ever expecting anything in return. Caitlin knew that the best way to show her gratitude was to give Maria the gift of freedom, the freedom to live without the burden of always having to work, to live a life that was finally just for her. But it wasn't just about giving Maria the financial means to retire. Caitlin knew that it was about showing Maria that her sacrifices had never gone unnoticed, that the love and support she had shown Caitlin and her family all those years had made a difference. That, even now, years after the last dish had been washed and the last floor had been scrubbed, Maria's kindness still mattered, and it always would. In that moment, Caitlin made a vow to herself. She would ensure that Maria would never have to work again. She would give her the peace she had earned so many times over. It wasn't just an act of charity, it was an act of love. Because Caitlin understood, perhaps more than anyone, that it's not just the people who make headlines that shape our lives. It's the quiet, selfless ones, the ones who work behind the scenes, who never ask for recognition, but whose impact is felt in ways that words can never fully capture. And Maria, the woman who had been Caitlin's second mother, deserved all the recognition and love that Caitlin could give. So, Caitlin began to plan, with the knowledge that the most important gift she could ever give was not just a retirement fund, but the knowledge that Maria's life had mattered in ways that would leave a lasting legacy, one of love, sacrifice, and gratitude. As Caitlin Clark's basketball career continued to skyrocket, with each game she played, she became more and more of a symbol of determination, skill, and perseverance. The roar of the crowd, the flashing lights of the cameras, the accolades, the praise. Caitlin had entered a world where her every move was scrutinized, celebrated, and dissected. She had achieved more than she could have ever dreamed. The dreams she had nurtured as a child were now her reality. And yet, despite all the attention, all the fame, there was something tugging at her heart, something she couldn't shake. She had risen to the top of her game, but as Caitlin climbed the ranks, she never lost sight of where she came from. She didn't forget the small things that had shaped her parents' sacrifices, the long hours they worked to make ends meet, and, most importantly, Maria, the woman who had stood by Caitlin's side, quietly supporting her, loving her, and caring for her in a way that Caitlin never fully understood until she was older. As Caitlin's rise in the basketball world became a media sensation, she started to receive attention from all corners, sponsors, interviews, and even endorsement deals. But there was one question that kept circling in her mind. What about Maria? Every time Caitlin stood on the court, hearing the cheers of thousands, winning game after game, making the buzzer beaters, and breaking records, there was a feeling deep within her. It was a feeling of pride and joy, yes, but also a gnawing sense of guilt. How could she be living this dream, reaching heights she had once only imagined, while Maria, who had helped her get here, was still working, still cleaning houses at the age of 80. Caitlin couldn't ignore it. She didn't want to ignore it. Every day, as her fame grew, the image of Maria working tirelessly behind the scenes stuck with her. Maria, who had been a mother figure when Caitlin's own mother was working late into the night. Maria, who never expected anything in return but gave all that she had. As Caitlin traveled the country, competing in front of thousands of people, she could not stop thinking about the woman who was still out there, alone in her apartment, scrubbing floors, cleaning windows, doing the work she had done for decades. The thought of Maria's hands, trembling with age, the way her back ached after hours of cleaning, it hurt Caitlin deeply. It was during one of Caitlin's long flights back home from an away game, her body exhausted from the physical demands of her sport, when the realization hit her hardest. She had everything she had ever wanted. But Maria? Maria was still struggling. Still working, still tirelessly giving her energy to others, but never asking for a thing in return. The guilt that Caitlin felt became unbearable. How could she not give back? How could she not repay the woman who had given so much of herself, day after day, for so many years? It was in that moment, on that flight, that Caitlin made a promise to herself. She would not just help Maria, she would ensure that Maria would never have to lift another finger again. No more scrubbing floors. No more aching joints. No more struggling just to get by. Caitlin would do whatever it took to give Maria the life she deserved, the peace, the comfort, the relaxation that Maria had earned but had never asked for. The woman who had worked tirelessly for so long, never once asking for anything, never once expecting any recognition, Caitlin would make sure that Maria's later years would be filled with rest and love, with the peace of knowing that she was cared for. Just as Caitlin had been cared for all those years. Caitlin knew that no amount of money or fame could ever truly repay Maria for all the sacrifices she had made. But Caitlin also knew that she had the power now to change Maria's life. She had the ability to offer Maria something that was far more valuable than any check or material possession. She could offer Maria the freedom to stop working, to finally take care of herself, to be able to enjoy life without the constant stress of worrying about bills and cleaning houses. Caitlin could offer Maria the opportunity to rest, something that had been denied to her for so long. At first, Caitlin wasn't sure how she could make it happen. She knew she had the financial means, but how could she approach Maria? How could she offer such a life-changing gift without making Maria feel uncomfortable or indebted? How could she balance the love and gratitude she felt with the fear of overstepping, of imposing her success on the quiet, humble woman who had asked for nothing? But Caitlin didn't let those thoughts hold her back. Maria had been there for her when Caitlin couldn't even fathom the heights she would one day reach. Now it was her turn to be there for Maria. Caitlin knew that she couldn't change the past, but she could shape the future. She could give Maria the one thing she truly needed: peace, comfort, and the ability to live her life with the joy and relaxation she had never known. So Caitlin began to plan, quietly, with a deep resolve in her heart. She contacted lawyers, arranged for a safe and secure retirement fund, and even researched the best possible ways to make Maria's life easier. It wasn't just about giving her money. It was about giving her the space to breathe, to enjoy the fruits of a life well lived, to know that everything was taken care of. Caitlin didn't want Maria to worry anymore, not about anything. She wanted Maria to rest. Finally, Caitlin's plan came together. It was time to make the call, time to make the gesture that would change Maria's life forever. With trembling hands, Caitlin picked up the phone. Her heart was racing, knowing that this moment would be a turning point for both of them. She called Maria, her voice a little shaky as she asked her to meet her, to come to a place that Caitlin had carefully arranged. When Maria arrived, she had no idea what to expect. She didn't know that Caitlin had been planning something life-changing, something that would give Maria the freedom she had so long deserved. And when Caitlin handed her the envelope, an envelope filled not just with money, but with the promise of comfort, peace, and a future without work, Maria's reaction was overwhelming. Tears welled up in her eyes as she opened the envelope, unable to comprehend what Caitlin was offering her. For the first time in her life, Maria was being told that she didn't have to work anymore, that her days of struggle and sacrifice were over. She couldn't believe it. Maria, who had given so much, who had always put others before herself, was now being given the gift of rest. She wept, overwhelmed with emotion, because in that moment, she realized that her years of hard work had meant something. They had been seen, they had been appreciated, and now, at long last, she could take a breath, knowing that Caitlin would never forget the role Maria had played in her life. Caitlin, too, was overcome with emotion as she saw Maria's reaction. This was the moment she had dreamed of, the moment when she could truly give back, when she could show Maria how much she meant to her, how much her sacrifices had shaped Caitlin's life. The gesture was simple, but its impact was immeasurable. It was the kind of love and gratitude that transcended words, transcended even the years of service Maria had given. It was a moment that would stay with both of them forever. Caitlin had done it. She had given Maria the gift of peace, the gift of a life well-deserved. And in that moment, they both knew that it wasn't just the basketball games or the awards that defined Caitlin's success. It was the love she had for the people who had been there for her when no one else was. And in this moment, Caitlin had given back in the most meaningful way she could. As Maria looked at the envelope in her trembling hands, everything seemed to stand still. The reality of the moment didn't quite sink in at first. She had never imagined that her life, one that had been so consistently defined by hard work, sacrifice, and quiet strength, could ever be different. She had always believed that her value lay in what she could do for others, that the true reward came from giving and not expecting anything in return. But in this single moment, as Caitlin looked at her with love and gratitude in her eyes, Maria realized that she had been wrong all along. Her worth wasn't just in what she could give, it was in who she was, in the love she had shown, and in the selflessness that had touched the hearts of those around her. And Caitlin, the girl she had helped raise, was finally showing her that she mattered too. The days that followed were filled with emotion for both women. Caitlin watched Maria with a sense of deep satisfaction as she saw the woman who had given so much now allow herself to finally rest. The first few days were the hardest for Maria. She couldn't quite reconcile herself to the idea of not working, of not constantly being busy. It felt strange to her, like something was missing, like she was no longer living up to her own expectations. But Caitlin patiently reminded her that she had earned this, that she deserved the rest, that for once, it was okay to just be. Caitlin reminded Maria of everything she had done, all the years of work, the late nights, the early mornings, the moments when Maria had given of herself without ever asking for anything in return. It was during this period that Maria began to truly understand the depth of Caitlin's gratitude. She had always known that Caitlin was special, that she had a talent that set her apart. But what Maria hadn't fully realized until this moment was how much Caitlin had internalized the lessons Maria had taught her. The hard work, the kindness, the quiet perseverance, those qualities that had defined Maria's life were now the very same qualities that Caitlin had taken with her as she stepped into the world of professional basketball. And now, Caitlin was returning those lessons in the most profound way possible, by showing Maria that her hard work had not gone unnoticed, that she had made a difference, and that her sacrifices had shaped Caitlin's life in ways that were immeasurable. Maria, who had always prided herself on her independence, found herself struggling with this new reality. It wasn't just about receiving the money or the gifts, it was about the change in her role in Caitlin's life. She had always been the caretaker, the one who did the giving. Now, she had to learn how to accept, how to be cared for in return. It was a humbling experience, and it took time for her to allow herself to fully let go of the years of doing it all herself. Caitlin, however, was patient. She knew it would take time for Maria to adjust, and so, she spent countless hours sitting with her, talking, reminiscing, and just being present. Caitlin was determined to show Maria that her life was now about more than just work. It was about peace, joy, and love. Slowly but surely, Maria began to allow herself to relax. She took up hobbies she had put aside for years, knitting, reading, gardening, and found comfort in the simple joys that had once been out of reach. She began to spend more time with Caitlin, attending her games when she could, cheering from the sidelines, and marveling at how far Caitlin had come. In those moments, when they would sit together and talk about the past, Maria began to understand just how much Caitlin had always admired her. She had never known how deeply she had impacted Caitlin's life, how her presence had shaped Caitlin into the strong, determined woman she had become. It was both overwhelming and beautiful for Maria to realize that her simple acts of care, her constant love, had left a lasting mark on Caitlin's heart. For Caitlin, the satisfaction of knowing that Maria could finally take the time to care for herself, to take a breath and not worry about the next task or chore, was profound. Caitlin didn't just feel relief for Maria, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The bond they shared was unlike anything Caitlin had experienced with anyone else. Maria had been there for her in her most vulnerable moments, had loved her unconditionally when Caitlin had nothing to offer in return. Now, Caitlin was doing for Maria what she had done for her all those years. She was making sure that Maria had everything she needed to enjoy her later years, to live without worry or stress, to embrace the peace that Caitlin felt she had so long deserved.